Welcome to the Herbs in Action Summit COVID and Beyond replays. Session 5, Aromatic Herbs Beyond Essential Oils for Supporting Immunity with Erika, Gallanton. This session was sponsored by the Herbal Nerd Society in partnership with The Practical Herbalist and Real Herbalism Radio. Also, Mudpaw Design House.
The information provided in this session and this summit is not intended to cure COVID-19 or any other disease. Due to the novel and emerging nature of COVID-19, no herbalist or medical professional can claim to cure or know how to cure this virus. We are not responsible for the healthcare choices you make, including your use of food, herbs, or any other substances for any reason. This information is not intended to diagnose, treat, or otherwise take the place of a doctor's advice. Seek professional medical advice if you suspect you have COVID-19 or other health problem. This information is provided for educational purposes only. The opinions expressed in our summits are those of the speaker alone and are not that of Herbs in Action or the Practical Herbalist. Use this information wisely.
Okay, so with that, I am overjoyed to introduce to you Erika Gallanton, clinical herbalist, clinical aromatherapist, practicing at Sovereignty Herbs in Ohio. I wrote the wrong word. In Ohio, and author of The Family Guide to Aromatherapy. She helps people connect not only with the plants, but also with the wisdom of their own bodies, drawing on the philosophies of the physiomedical and eclectic herbal traditions. Welcome, Erika.
Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here with you all.
Oh, I am so very happy to have you here. One of the big things that has been coming up for me and people around me has been aromatherapy. And the question,
yes.
It's growing and it's exciting to see it happening. There's a lot of safety concerns people have had. So I'm excited to have you here to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, it's been an interesting, I think, just sitting back watching the world unfold as I have, especially with the commentary on essential oils. And I think, one of the things that makes them really attractive to a lot of people who aren't necessarily, herbalists or in the healthcare profession, but for folks working at home is that they're accessible. You can go to you can even go to Walmart these days and buy essential oils actually. And so they're kind of these natural products that are, seemingly very accessible. And I guess what's difficult, similar to, trying to really learn how to help yourself with herbs over the counter is that there's a lot of background information that a person doesn't get when they're making that store purchase. So on one hand, I'm really grateful that, people have easy access to these really powerful tools. Essential oils are incredibly powerful tools, but they come with a lot of limitations. And I think that, when we get into it today, we're going to be talking about looking at some safety issues. And for those of you who are practitioners that, passing along this information to your clients or your patients, in regard to paying attention to these safety issues really is going to be surrounding this idea of recognizing the limitations that essential oils have. I think I've been kind of frightened by some of the rhetoric that's coming down the wire, like, you did what with that? Oh my gosh, don't do that. Don't do that. So I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit too.
Yeah, definitely. Because I've had a lot of people ask things that I honestly don't feel qualified to answer, like, can you take them internally? And are they safe for very small children or, people who are in immunocompromised positions, things like that? Mm-hmm. One of the questions that, has come up and that concerns people have had is that some essential oils are called antiviral. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So we have this, I'm just going to be very frank and honest, and people can send me hate email if they want. One of the things that I think is really a shame about, we have science going on in the background, scientific research going on in the background with, essential oils and all these little chemical components that make up an essential oil. The majority of this research is happening in a laboratory. And so, if a paper comes out and it says, oh, this particular essential oil or this component of this essential oil was found to have antiviral properties against yada, 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 sometimes what ends up happening is that that very preliminary science is then used in and twisted, I think, a little bit into kind of more of a marketing standpoint or marketing language. And that's not necessarily the researcher's fault or even the journal that the research was published in fault. It's just that somebody grabs onto that information and they run with it to sell something to us, right? And so, you know, we talk about this idea of, you know, what does antiviral mean when we're talking about, you know, essential oils with antiviral properties? And so I think that really it starts with understanding what that research means. And what that research means is that when you put an essential oil into a petri dish in a laboratory and you expose a virus to that essential oil, it does something to the virus to stop it from replicating or et cetera, et cetera. And there's some sort of antiviral action in that environment in the petri dish, which is awesome, right? That's first step in a long line of steps in order to come to the conclusion that then therefore the essential oil would be antiviral in the body. And so a lot of people, and I think, you know, this is something when I was researching for my book that I found a lot about, you know, these leaps that people make from this kind of petri dish research to a living human body. So when we're talking about, you know, the antiviral properties of essential oils, I think it's important to note that, I'm looking at my notes here on the screen, that when we're using essential oils safely, okay, so talking about topical use, so, you know, on the skin or breathing them in the air, they have very limited bioavailability. And what that means is that a very, very small amount of essential oil or the components of essential oil actually make it through to the bloodstream. Very, very small amounts. And within that, the chance that those molecules, those essential oil components, would actually come into direct contact with a virus, like it would in a petri dish, is very unlikely. So we can't take this idea of petri dish and go, okay, well, my human body is a petri dish, and the essential oil, if I rub it into my skin or I breathe it in, is going to have the same kind of effect. It's just not the case. But what's really interesting about, you know, the in vitro research with essential oils and these antiviral properties is really looking at some other really great ways that they can be used, that we can kind of get them in direct contact with viruses. And a lot of that has to do with this kind of safe topical use or this use of inhalation. I think that's pretty much all I was going to say about that. I think, you know, they're most of the antiviral properties are really going to be, you know, we're going to see with the use of, you know, antiviral essential oils, the best things that we're going to be able to do really is disinfection of surfaces. So if we add essential oils to our cleaning products to help kind of disinfect surfaces, that's going to be a really great antiviral way of using an antiviral essential oil. Also, you know, homemade hand soaps, homemade hand sanitizers, these kinds of things are going to really help with antiviral. And then, of course, diffusing them in the air. So there's this really long, you know, beautiful history of using aromatic herbs as fumitory herbs, right? So these are herbs that are, you know, were traditionally burnt as incense to kind of purge the air of evil, if you will, or purge the air of sickness. And we can look to essential oils in a similar way, especially if we're, you know, living in homes where we don't want, you know, tons of plant smoke floating around inside. You know, essential oils can be used, you know, in this kind of antiviral capacity, being diffused in an aromatherapy diffuser. So that those are kind of the ways that I really see essential oils having an antiviral effect.
So do you think it's wise to just do antiviral ones in the home, or is there other ones that help support like immune health using them that way?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I think, you know, when I think about aromatherapy and I think about supporting the immune system with aromatherapy, you know, I as an herbalist, it's hard for me to go, oh, you know, if I diffuse this oil, it's going to support my immune system. That there's some sort of linear thing that happens there. to be honest with you, I think that, one of the ways that, in general, when we're talking about our immunity as an integrated system, multifaceted system, where aromatherapy is really going to come into play is in helping with supporting the stress response and helping with stress management, right? So, I mean, I'm sure it's been talked about all throughout the day, this, this ongoing stress of what's happening, especially stress in the home. If you've got, you're working from home, you don't have any childcare, you've got the kids running around. These are not easy times for people. And the stress itself is really going to have a negative impact on your immune system. So really looking at, aromatherapies, where essential oils for me really shine in immune support and immune health is looking at helping support the stress response and manage stress management.
So do you have any safety concerns about essential oils specifically? And then maybe we could talk a little bit about what some of the other avenues to get into aromatherapy are that aren't really just essential oils.
Yeah, so I think that, first and foremost, I mean, just like herbs, just like herbalism, not all essential oils are considered safe or even appropriate for all ages and all people under all circumstances. And so, I think that there's, first of all, a job that we all have to do, I think, as herbalists, because essential oils can be tools in our toolbox. But also people looking after their families at home. It's important that we start to consider educating ourselves about these safety protocols. And there's a lot of really, really great resources out there to do that. So for example, essential oils, being exposed to essential oils at, the tender age of 3 months, simply because they're in the home, is going to be a very different interface than if you're, a robust 25-year-old burning essential oils in your home by yourself. Do you know what I mean? So there's so age is definitely going to be playing into safety concerns, and so that's the essential oils themselves, but also the amount that's being used. So when we're looking at when we're looking at the safe use of essential oils, I'm generally talking about topical use. Diluted topical use. So you have a certain percentage of number of drops that you use in a bottle of massage oil, for example, that's then applied to the skin. It's never just put on neat. You never just drop the bottle on your skin and rub it in, because you can cause yourself all kinds of sensitization reactions and burns and all kinds of not so good things. Making sure that you've got the right kind of dose, if you will, and you're using oils appropriate for that age group. And this varies across the board. So that's definitely one safety concern. Yeah, I think, the other thing too, is if we're looking at using essential oils for, disinfecting around the house or any kind of household cleaner products, anything like that, there needs to be an awareness that if these oils come into contact with mucous membranes or any other sensitive tissues, they can cause some pretty significant reactions. So especially if you have, little children running around and you've just wiped off the counter and they go, "Ooh, that smells good," and then they start licking the counter. There can be problems associated with that. It's not just like, oh, it's natural, it's safe. And so accidental contact with mucous membranes and other sensitive tissues is definitely a huge point of, that's a major reason why essential oils have shown up in the scientific literature and case reports of having adverse reactions. So accidental contact is an issue, like a safety concern for sure. And if you're going to be diffusing oils in your home, so essential oils are getting diffused in the home, you think, okay, I'm going to have some going just so we can keep the antiviral or the viruses down, this kind of fumigation idea. Not all, you kind of have to learn to diffuse for the most vulnerable person in the house. And so, if you have very young children, or if you have got the elderly living with you, or you have someone who's on loads of medications or is generally immune compromised, you're not necessarily going to be wanting to use the same essential oils as if, like I said before, you were a robust adult living on your own. So, I always say diffuse for the most vulnerable person in your home. And I also want to say in that regard, you need to be mindful of your pets.
Thank you.
That's for me, that's another big safety concern in the house. It's, if you have animals that are living with you, again, you want to avoid unnecessary contact. You want to make sure you're not accidentally spilling the bottle on them or, overexposing them. For example, if you're going to diffuse essential oils in a room, don't lock your cat in there. These are so powerful. They're so powerful to the human senses, and our senses are dulled down very much in comparison to some of, for cats and dogs. And if they can't get away from that smell, they can't get away from that irritant, it can be really not only disturbing, but it can actually be very toxic to them. So, if you are diffusing oils in your home, you need to make sure there's good airflow and that you don't have any pets or anything like that locked in the room. The same if you're diffusing around children. You want to make sure that they can get away from whatever it is you're doing if it doesn't smell right to them, if it's irritating to them, that they're able to kind of leave that space. So there is that, pets to consider as well. And I will say that, I want to touch on sustainability at some point here in our discussions, but I will say that, if we're diffusing essential oils all day, every day, it's a huge drain on our natural resources. It takes so much plant material to create such a small amount of essential oil. To be using them so excessively, to me, is a real sadness. Because, not to mention the fossil fuels that go into their growing and their harvesting and their export, but there's also human resources as well. The farmers, the wildcrafters, and then of course the plants and the land. The sheer quantity of land required to grow all of these plants in order to get them into that tiny little bottle. So it's not a very sustainable action to be using them all the time. But that being said, for personal health reasons and for your household health reasons, overexposure to essential oils or one particular essential oil for extended periods of time can lead to sensitization. So that means that eventually it becomes very irritating to your system or to someone else in your family's system. And once those sensitization reactions are, locked in, they tend to not go away. And so, it's too much of a good thing, right? So if we're going to be responsibly using essential oils in the home, this is not something that we want to do all day, every day. So those would be some of my safety concerns, just kind of the tip of the iceberg.
And I was going to suggest, for reference, let's assume you've got a household with small children or you've got cats and dogs in a bedroom that's like 10 by 10, an average size bedroom. I would think, and I could be wrong, this is why I'm asking, I would think just like maybe 2 or 3 drops of essential oil in a diffuser in that size space.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you, sometimes you can get these really great aromatherapy diffusers. Well, there's a couple different ways you can do it, right? You get the ones that have the glass with the candle you put underneath, and you put the water in the dish and then you light the candle and it gently heats the water. So, in a small 10 by 10 room, let's just say with 2 adults, a couple of drops, maybe 3 or 4 drops in that dish is all you're going to need,
Right.
Before it starts getting to be a little bit too much. But you can get these really great aromatherapy diffusers that are electric as well. You plug them in and they kind of vaporize. They're vaporizers. And reading the instructions on those, it usually says the same amount. It says maybe 3 or 4 drops of essential oil, and that you should follow those instructions. They're there for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and we are going to have, or we do have, some questions about like quality, purity, brands, what to get, what not to get, the
Great.
various doTERRAs and Young Living and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You want to address that now, or do you want to talk about that at the Q&A?
Yeah, well, let's Well, we could talk about it now. Sure. We've got lots of other things we could talk about. Sure, let's talk about this now.
Okay, so the first question was the difference between like doTERRA or Young Living, any of those, and other brands that are not necessarily MLM style. Is there a real quality difference? Is there not? Is it, there's a financial difference between those often?
Yeah, so this is a really big can of worms.
Yes.
I'm gonna do my best to not jump into the worms myself.
Right.
So one of the things that I mean, I can't turn around and say to you, oh, you should go and buy these brands or those brands or this brands or that brands. But what I do want to encourage is that when you are looking and researching into essential oil sources, so the companies you're buying from, that they are transparent about the supply chain. And what I mean by the supply chain is that a lot of these essential oil companies are getting their essential oils from the same distillers, from the same supply chain, right? And there are issues that have come up, in this expansion of essential oils. There's just not enough essential oil to go around for all these people who want to buy lavender, for example. And so what ends up happening is they end up becoming adulterated with, what kind of, or the batches are extended with these components that are naturally occurring in the essential oil, but not in the same quantity that they are then added to it. So they have more to kind of ship around the world. And this is difficult because you're looking for companies that are transparent about where they're sourcing their oils. They're transparent about things like adhering to international trade in Endangered Species Act regulations. So you want to make sure that they're not trading in endangered species. I think that says a lot about a company if they're prepared to do that. I also think that it's important that you look for what's called the GCMS report. So this is how companies are able to analyze what's in the essential oil to verify its identity. And it's not, having a GCMS on its own is not necessarily going to say, oh, this is a high quality oil. But what it is going to provide for you is a little bit, is the company themselves trying to be as transparent as they can about the identity of what they're selling you. And I think, so these are just kind of general tips. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about, for some people about, something like a perfume oil or like, some of these oils that you can put into burners that aren't actually essential oils. They're kind of synthetic fragrances. And so, you always want to make sure that on the bottle it says 100% pure essential oil. And these words like, therapeutic grade, et cetera, it's really, really interesting, actually. This is a whole nother can of worms. Essential oils aren't actually really regulated by the FDA, right? So they don't have a particular category that they fit into nicely. For example, most herbs or herbal products fit into dietary supplements. Your pharmaceuticals fit into pharmaceuticals, and then we have our foods. And essential oils some of them have a status that can be called, it's called the GRAS status, right? So this is generally recognized as safe. And that food list is for food additives, right? So generally recognized as safe as a food additive. So this is for the food and flavoring industry. But they're still not, essential oils themselves are still not kind of classified as anything in particular. And so, as such, these terms that are used often to sell essential oils like therapeutic grade are industry based. They're not actually legally based terms. And so just because a company says therapeutic grade, they could just be slapping that term right on that bottle and you wouldn't know any better. And so, understanding that this language is industry based and it's not necessarily it's not FDA based language. Say something's therapeutic grade, it's kind of only relevant to the industry, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answered some of the questions there. I can't just go, oh, you should buy oils from these people and those people suck. I can't do that. But
well, yeah, and companies shift what they're doing. So just because a company is doing a great job today doesn't mean 2 years from now they'll still be doing a great job. So,
Right. And there are a lot of issues going on with, the essential oil supply chain. And for those of you, who are interested in really understanding where your essential oils are coming from, I really highly recommend that you start looking into the work of organizations like United Plant Savers, and there's a few others who are really looking at some of these issues, and really understand too. I think when we're looking about quality of essential oils, I think part of that piece of defining quality is also about defining sustainable sourcing. And so you really need to look at what that means, right? The 3 P's of sustainability. So do your research. If you're concerned about these things, you should really spend the time looking into it, because it's a fascinating territory. I will tell you that much.
Definitely. Are there any debate or not debate? Is there any specific methods that you would recommend for using essential oils safely in the home in general?
Yeah. So I would say, the three main ways that I think, well, I think it's more like 2 ways that I think are most safe, that have the highest safety profile, according to essential oil safety experts. Methods of use include the topical application, which I'll go into in a second, and inhalation. So that's through your diffusers. When it comes to topical application, what is being referred to here is, taking the essential oil and diluting it into something like olive oil or coconut oil, and then applying it to the skin, in the form of massage. This isn't taking the bottle of essential oil and dumping it all over yourself, or rubbing it in, or putting it in your mouth or up your nose or anything like that. It's honestly taking that very, very highly concentrated substance and diluting it in something that makes it less concentrated, and then applying it to the skin.
Is there a rule for dilution? Is there for
there are Yes, there are rules for dilution, and I think that this is one of the. I don't know if it's okay for me to pitch, but I have all of those in this book. And there's actually a lot of really great sources for the dilution ratios that are considered safe, and a lot of these have been established through the work of Robert Tisserand and the Tisserand Institute. They really have done a very good job of kind of standardizing, the kind of safe dilutions. So for very, very young to the very, very old, there are different amounts that are considered appropriate. So you wouldn't be using the same amount of drops in coconut oil for a small child as you would for an adult, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Then inhalation?
Yes. So that's the other way of doing it. And it's the same, inhalation is more difficult to dose, as far as if you're going to be diffusing in your home. But like we said, a couple of drops per 100 square feet is probably enough. There's also these really great things, and this is something that can be really helpful, I think, if they're out and about, and they're feeling stressed out and they're anxious, and people aren't paying attention to the face masks, and they're not paying attention, to the distancing and all of that. You can have your Aromatherapy Inhaler, which are these really funny. I think you get metal ones, you can get plastic ones where you actually can put the essential oil, just a drop or 2. Onto this wick, and it screws into this what's called an aromatherapy inhaler, and you can literally just and sniff.
I've seen those necklaces, and sometimes they're really quite pretty.
They can be, yeah, they can be. People might give you kind of like a "what are you snorting" look, but that's okay. Don't mind them. You know what it is. So those are, those can be really, really handy. I found those really helpful for. Across the board helpful for, especially for people who are experiencing a lot of anxiety, going out in public, and they need a tool to kind of be with them while they're out and about. Having a quick inhalation of an oil can really help. bring your breath back. So those things can be really, really helpful.
I imagine that would be really helpful potentially to teenagers, because I know we've got a large rate, we've seen increasing amounts of anxiety and depression amongst teens, and I'm guessing it's going to get worse with, the current pandemic, that their lives are even more uncertain than, many of us adults. So
yeah, yep, definitely. I agree with you. And I mean, I think that's another really wonderful thing that essential oils can bring to the table. It's one thing to be like, you should sit down and take your tincture, or sit down and take your, drink your cup of tea. But under normal circumstances, if a kid's at school,
yeah,
they don't have access to making the tea, and having alcohol in the school can be problematic to explain, right? So a lot of tinctures have alcohol in them. So if they're needing something at school to help them cope that's plant-based, I mean, essential oils can be really, really wonderful, especially those personal inhalers, because they're not going to be bothering anyone else with this aroma. That's really just for them, and they can sniff it and put it back in their bag, so they can be really, really handy that way, and very effective. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me the most about aroma, in all of its forms, whether that's coming from your cup of tea or from an essential oil, is this direct and immediate profound effect on the psyche. It's just, the science behind it is fascinating, or the role that aroma plays in triggering our memories and our emotions, and it's a very powerful tool to help shift. So yeah, I think that's a really great point.
Are there any particular herbs or essential oils, either way, that you particularly like for dealing with like anxiety and the stress that we're all facing right now?
Yeah, well, it's interesting with aroma because it's so subjective. Why I could turn around and I could say to you, so one oil that I'm working with a lot right now, and it's actually from a plant that I've been revisiting as a whole herb, is Clary Sage. And for me, it's just one of these, I've been working with it for a while, trying to get my head around my experiences with it, and what that means for me within a clinical context. But for me, it is just right now, it's one of the most soothing aromas that there is. But I could turn around and I could say, oh gosh, well, you should try Clary Sage. And someone else would be like, oh, that smells foul. That's not relaxing at all,
Yeah.
So I definitely think, Clary Sage is definitely one of them that I've been really enjoying. A sweet marjoram is another, which I have to tell you makes a fantastic cup of tea if you're into growing some sweet marjoram. So, and even as a tea, it's just delightful. It's kind of what I call a sparkly relaxing. So you get this kind of stimulating, aromatics are really good at stimulating, right? But they also have this, they can have this wonderfully relaxing effect. So sweet marjoram is one of those plants that just, for me, is kind of like a sparkly relaxing. I know that sounds really foo-foo, but it's the only way I know how to describe it.
I can get my head around that. The idea of just, feeling like you're relaxed and you're very chill, but you're also awake. It's not putting you to sleep. You're awake and you are aware and very cool with what's going on.
Yeah. Well, and there's, I think even in herbalism, there's a very strong difference between sedative, being like sedate and getting sedated, versus relaxed, and the differences between those are, I think, are evident in sweet marjoram. It's much more of a relaxing oil than I feel like I need to go take a nap kind of oil.
So when you're working with like essential oils or with aromatherapy beyond essential oils, if it's a plant that you could take internally, like sweet marjoram or Clary Sage, not as much, but regular sage, or rosemary.
Clary Sage you can take internally for sure.
Okay, so if it's one of those types of herbs that you could take internally as a tea if you took the whole plant, does that mean the essential oil is going to be safe internally, or is there not actually as good it's not an easy correlation?
Well, I think that's how how do I answer this? I think that's kind of how we define safe and what we mean by that. Are all herbs safe for all people under all circumstances? It's hard to say yes to that. But what I will say is that when we're looking at an essential oil, we're looking at a very, very concentrated plant extract. And so you're getting, and we haven't even touched on the idea of internal use yet, but you're getting, even in that one drop of essential oil, you're getting many, 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 many teacups worth of essential oil, right? So to break that down into, okay, I'm going to have a cup of sweet marjoram tea on its own. Yes, there's going to be essential oil in there, but it's also going to be surrounded by and buffered by all of the other constituents that come out of the herb during that infusion. And so you are going to have, a little bit of essential oil in there, but it's not even going to be the amount that you would get out of a drop from an essential oil bottle. And I think that sweet marjoram's a really good example. Is this a tea that I would give to a 3-month-old? No. Is it a tea that I would recommend for a 6-year-old? Yeah. But would I use sweet marjoram with a 6-year-old? It might be a little bit too strong, and I certainly wouldn't use it on a 3-month-old. Does that make sense? So these concentrated oils are, to try to jump from essential oil safety to herbalism safety is kind of difficult.
Yeah, so it's not a real straight correlation.
No, it's really, really not. And I think actually one of the, one of the questions we talked about, discussing is this, when a situation might come up that it might be better to use the herb over the essential oil.
Yeah.
And I think a really great example of this is looking at some of the safety precautions surrounding the use of essential oils that have menthol in them. So we're looking specifically at peppermint and spearmint. They have these really high menthol levels. And generally speaking, according to the essential oil safety experts, using peppermint or spearmint essential oil around children under the age of 6 is considered to be unsafe. And this is based on a number of case reports that have come through for toxicity reactions, some pretty severe ones, based on overexposure to menthol on its own. And so there were, the child having a very, very bad experience because they were covered in menthol and they had a very bad reaction to that, severe enough. And I can't remember if there was a death on that one. I get that in eucalyptus messed up sometimes. But basically, so here we have a situation where we've got, especially when we're talking about respiratory support, we have peppermint and spearmint as herbs that are super supportive and lovely for children, especially when they've got, really congested kind of breathing and respiratory. Maybe they're very stuffed up. They've got a head cold. It can just be very supportive and relieving to respiratory function. So, here we have a situation where it's like, okay, well, maybe you've got 5-year-olds and, you want to help support their breathing and help them clear some of the gunk out. You can't use peppermint essential oil. It's not considered safe, but you could give them a cup of peppermint tea, maybe with a little raw honey in it. And you can have them sit there with that hot cup of tea and breathe in some of those beautiful aromatics over that cup of tea. And as an herbalist, to me, that is a very safe use of peppermint. And it can be very, very relieving. And so sometimes it's better to think about using that whole herb. I mean, especially when it comes to these kind of these safety issues that you get with these really concentrated essential oils.
Well, yeah, and I was going to ask you that. I mean, doing a steam like that, or just even breathing in your tea, that's another way of doing aromatherapy, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a very undervalued way of doing aromatherapy. Absolutely. I think, there's a lot about, I think a lot of people are very passionate about aromatherapy because it is so impactful on the psyche. And I think that sometimes, especially in our American culture at large, we're taught that more powerful is better. Right. But, I think for me, any kind of aromatic ritual, which includes this idea of like taking your time to drink a really lovely cup of peppermint tea, is going to have a really wonderful effect on you. And you're going to be getting all kinds of goodness from the plant that's not just the essential oil. We're going to be looking at all the other different supportive compounds that are in that plant that you wouldn't be getting if you were just diffusing it in your house. And having that nice cup of tea again, just, even looking at sweet marjoram, for example, just the aroma off the tea itself is enough to really kind of do its work, in the psyche and, with the stress response. You just need a few seconds of aroma, just a few seconds of aroma to really get that psychological impact. You don't need to be, it doesn't need to be with you all day, every day for you to actually get an impact from it. So, yeah.
How about using like a bath? I'm thinking about like small children. Would that be like using in bath, not necessarily essential oil? I'm thinking maybe that would be like tea. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think, there's a lot of, using essential oils in the bath is kind of a more of a loaded discussion. I think for some people, there's lots of differing opinions in the aromatherapy community about the safety of using essential oils like directly in the bath water versus needing to dilute them first in a carrier oil, which is what I suggest, because again, when you think about essential oils, most of them float on the surface of the water. And so when you go to sit down in the bathtub, you get direct contact of that essential oil on all those sensitive tissues down there, and you can end up with some pretty significant burns. And it's just a part of your body that you don't want to get burned. And this is especially the case for little kids who have really tender skin. And so, if you are wanting to use essential oils in the bath, please, please, please put them into a carrier oil first. Put them into a little bit of olive oil first. It's just common sense, really. But, but again, we have the situation where, eucalyptus is here's another good example. So this is another essential oil that is contraindicated with children under the age of 6. So essential oil safety experts have said, don't use eucalyptus for children under the age of 6. It's just too potent, too powerful, and there's been a number of case reports with adverse events. But, as a tea in the bath, one of the things that's wonderful about eucalyptus is that it's mucolytic, right? Mucolytic, which means that it can really help cut through heavy catarrh. And it can really help you breathe a little bit easier. It is very relieving to inhale. And so here we have the essential oil itself, not safe in the bath for children under the age of 6. But if you were to get the eucalyptus blue gum eucalyptus, eucalyptus globulus tea and make a tea of it, or stuff the dry herb in like a pantyhose stocking and tie it up and stick it in the bathtub and make like a big bathtub tea out of it, it's not going to be the same, essential oil punch that you would get, but it's going to have this really wonderful aromatic effect, and it will be supportive and helpful, especially with all that steam. And that would be something that as an herbalist, I would feel very safe recommending for a child under the age of 6. Maybe, maybe not, younger than 3, for example, but, so you can use herbs in the bath with children much more safely than you can essential oils, for sure. And it can be fun if you're willing to clean up the mess afterwards. It can be fun. They can enjoy being in a bathtub with flowers and petals and herbs and playing with the plants, and it can be a really wonderful time for them. So it's a really nice thing to try.
It sounds really stress relieving for me.
Well, giving a kid a bath is, sometimes it can be fun, sometimes not so fun.
Well, I don't know if I climb in the bathtub myself. You guys.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
We did have a question here from Shelley. Can essential oils assist with keeping your immune system healthy or protect from catching a virus or picking up bad germs? And she's talking about recipes for hand sanitizers and cleaning sprays. Are those likely to be effective?
Right. So this is a really good question. And I think that if we're going to be using essential oils to help prevent the spread of a virus, it needs to be stated that there are many essential oils that have been tested in the laboratory, so with in vitro or in petri dishes, that can have an antiviral effect. Whether or not they're going to have an antiviral effect against COVID-19 is a whole nother story. There's no research on that. But if we are going to try to use essential oils as these antivirals, that actually using them as for disinfecting and for hygiene are probably the best, most effective ways of using those tools, for sure. And that would be in the case of cleaning solutions that you're using, natural solutions that you're using, and homemade hand soaps and hand sanitizers and things like that. Not all essential oils have antiviral properties in and of themselves. Many do, but not all. And not all essential oils have been researched in that capacity. And I will say that there are 0 essential oils that have at this moment in time have any research regarding their specific kind of anti-COVID-19 actions. So hopefully that clarifies that a bit for that person.
I think that helps. Are there any essential oils? Like I know I've heard things like tea tree was super popular as a antimicrobial, antibacterial, like everything oil for a long time. Lavender, I've heard. Are there any specific ones that are particularly good or that you would recommend as generally safe for most people, generally effective?
Yes. Yeah. So, and we say most people, we're talking about adults.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, because again, it's like, well, we could say, generally safe for most adults, because again, we have this whole issue with kids and things. But I think there are a few, and I just want to be clear too that when we're looking at this term antimicrobial, we sometimes want to just shove everything in that box. And oftentimes really what that term is referring to, especially in regards to essential oil research, has to do with bacteria and fungus, not necessarily viral. So if you're seeing something and it says, oh, it was shown to have an antimicrobial action, but it doesn't tell you what that is, it's not necessarily, you need to necessarily assume an antiviral action. Viruses are different, a different category altogether in that regard. So it's just, I think that's an important note to keep in mind. But when I'm looking at using essential oils, especially for this, for the fumigation, right? We talked about this tradition, this historical tradition of using plants to fumigate and kind of clear the air. There's a long list of herbs that have really strong traditional use in this way, being burned. And so it might be, it might be a leap for some to assume that, these are the ones that we should go to first. And 3 of my favorites right now are Bae Laurel. So this is Laurus nobilis. This is the you put bay in your cooking, bay leaf in your cooking. This is the same plant. And this has a really long history of use, of being kind of used to kind of clear the air, clean the air. Up. And so that's a wonderful one, and it has a lovely aroma, and it's got this kind of anti-infective property, so kind of pestilent property, more directed at bacteria per se than viruses, but it is one that I put a lot of stock in as far as being able to kind of clean the air. And I will say, for those of you who have not tried, for adults who are robust and whatnot, adding a bay leaf into a pot of tea is a wonderfully supportive thing to do for upper respiratory health. Especially if it's feeling tight and gunky and really damp in there, like you're not getting a good breath in. Sometimes that bay, just putting a bay leaf in the teapot can be really lovely. So don't be afraid to try the bay leaf in the teapot. Another one that I'm really loving right now is rosemary. And quite closely related and similar is thyme. Now, that's thyme essential oil. And both rosemary and thyme also make lovely teas. Not the essential oil, but the whole plant. Make lovely teas. And, one of the things that I will say about, the differences between those 3. So if I'm going to be choosing between, okay, she said rosemary, thyme, or Bae Laurel. If you smell the oil first before using it, before diffusing it all over your home, you're going to notice that there's a difference in their intensity. This is something I refer to as kind of as their heat. I don't know if that's the appropriate term to use, but when you smell a rosemary versus smelling a thyme can be really hot and intense. You know, the way that like an oregano essential oil is really hot and burning and intense. And so that's going to give you a little bit of sensory information as to, okay, maybe I shouldn't use as much thyme as I would maybe rosemary, if that makes any sense. But so right now, you know, I'm always going to, you know, my roots and my traditions, which are, you know, looking at some of these more of these kind of Western European plants like the rosemary and the bay and the thyme, and even well, I'm not going to say that one. I was going to say sage, but we actually need to be very careful with sage essential oil. So don't use that one unless you've done your research.
Yeah, that one's one that has a tendency to be adulterated, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think all essential oils have right now, I think, a tendency to be adulterated. I think that it's happening more commonly than the industry is prepared to admit, or that we can even trace. But I think one of the issues that goes on with sage essential oil in particular, although it's wonderful, this is an herb. This is a plant that you should probably use as an herb. So rather than using it as an essential oil, if you're going to bring it into your home. You know, I love sage essential oil. I feel safe using it because I've spent some time with it, but it is very high in a component referred to as ketones, right? Ketones can be, for some people, overstimulating, and especially if you have a history of epilepsy. Sage essential oil is those ketones are thought to be able to potentially trigger seizures. And ketones are very strong. I mean, these are really strong molecules that have pretty intense effect. And so it's not an essential oil that should be used kind of willy-nilly, so to speak.
Okay. We have a question. Here it was. Julie asks, there is a theory about if you like salty foods, you like less sweet oils, and if you like sweets, you like sweet smelling oils. Have you found this to be true?
I've never heard of that. Can you say that again? That's fascinating to me.
The theory is, if you like salty foods, then you will like less sweet oils. And if you like sweet foods, then you will like oils that are less sweet smelling.
Huh.
So I'm guessing that would mean that if you like sweet foods, you'll tend to like maybe oregano more because it's not as sweet. And if you like salty foods, you'll have a tendency toward maybe the spearmint, which is a little.
Yeah, so that is very fascinating. I've not actually heard that directly, but I will say, Julie, that there is an enormous amount of research that goes into the physiology of not only our sense of smell, but our sense of taste, and how these two senses are hardwired into this immediate emotional reaction, which has been described as kind of a primal reaction to, oh, that's good for me, or oh, that's not good for me. I don't think that it works that easily, as far as, I mean, you know, people can eat sugar and be like, oh, that tastes so good, that must be good for me, and it's absolutely not. But I think that there is, what I'm trying to say is that there is something to the psychology of gustation, or the psychology of flavor, that ties in very specifically with our sense of smell, and how connected the two are, and how that impacts our psychology. And so it's an interesting point. I'll have to look into it because I find that very interesting.
Yeah, it is. I thought that was a really interesting one too. Apparently, she just said she learned this when she studied Campo in Ishikawa. So perhaps it's a Campo thing.
Perhaps. Very cool.
I had another question here from Marco. That's where it was. Marco of the Herbal Nerd Society asks, I pick herbs from my garden for use as food and medicine. Is aromatherapy better using fresh herbs or dried herbs if you're doing them? I'm assuming he means like if you're doing tea.
Yeah, so very good question. It's such a good question. I think that depends on how fresh the dried herbs are. So, for example, so one of the things about using dried herbs is that you as they're dried, you put more in your teacup, right? If I'm going to do like lemon balm, for example, and I'm going to do a fresh lemon balm tea, I'm going to have a handful of fresh lemon balm, which is going to be, a quarter of the amount of a handful of dried lemon balm.
Yeah.
And if those aromatic herbs are dried properly, not exposed to heat or too much light, you can really preserve those volatile molecules, and you can get more of a. Some people experience not even just more of an aromatic tea, but a different kind of aromatic that you get using the dry versus the fresh. And so it's interesting because I think some plants do way better. For me, like if I'm really focusing on aromatics, I mean, lemon balm is a really great example, which I really prefer using lemon balm fresh as a tea, and usually as a cold infusion. You can really get that lemoniness out of it versus using it dried and hot. So I would encourage you very much, especially if you're growing your own plants, to play around, because these different preparations are going to bring out the different qualities of those aromatics for sure.
Nice. And then let me see what else we have here. Okay. You kind of answered this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just because I think since it's about small children, it bears repeating.
Okay.
Asks, is it better to use essential oils or whole plant aromatherapy with small children? And are there plants or essential oils that are particularly dangerous for children under the age of 3? So since she was specific, I thought I should ask that.
Yes. There are, I will say there is, first of all, if I'm going to be working with plants and children, I, as an herbalist, am going to go to whole plants first. So if you have access to, herbs for the bath, for example, or for tea, that's the route that I would go first, because the aromatics are a part of that. If you are, interested in using essential oils with children, there are essential oils that are considered safe for children under the age of 3. Although some essential oil safety experts say don't use essential oils at all for children under the age of 3. Not everybody agrees, okay? And that's part of what I did with my book as well, is I kind of went through everybody's opinions and I talk about them. But there are definitely going to be way more essential oils that are unsafe for that age group than there are going to be considered safe. I mean, I think one of the most safe essential oils, if I can say, for younger children, the two really are going to be chamomile and lavender. But let me just put this out here as well. There's this whole other realm of aromatic preparations known as hydrosols, or sometimes referred to as hydrolats. Folks like Jeannie Rose and Ann Harmon and Kathy Skipper have done a really great job bringing hydrosols into the forefront of aromatherapy here in the United States. And so what a hydrosol is actually the water portion of the distillation. So when you are steam distilling essential oils, you have this you have the steam that comes up, it captures the volatile or the essential oils, it carries it across, and then distributes it back down as it's condensed. You get the oil pulled off from the water. And the water portion carries with it just a very small amount of the aromatics, but also some water-soluble qualities of the plants as well. And hydrosols are wonderful for children, wonderful. If you're interested in using aromatherapy, even for spritzers, I know kids just love spraying stuff, hoses, spray bottles, you name it. It's like it's super fun, right? So, instead of using the essential oil, the hydrosols can actually be a really, really gentle alternative for sure. So, and I will say that not all aromatherapy or essential oil safety experts are really agreeing on this age of 3 years old or younger. I've seen some aromatherapists talk about the use of essential oils below the age of 3. As an herbalist, I go to whole herb preparations first. I'm not thinking, oh, this child's 3 years old, let's use an essential oil. That's not where my head goes. But it's not to say that it's not possible if that's all you have on hand as well. So there's that to consider.
And then we have another question about internal use. Okay. And I guess I'm going to just flat out ask. Stephanie's asking about internal use of essential oils. She asked specifically, is there a safe way to do it, like a carrier oil or something like that? And then there was a question earlier, and I can't remember who it was, asking when can you take them internally and why or why not? Like, how do you tell the difference on whether it's okay?
Yeah. So I'm going to start this discussion by saying, if you can take the whole plant internally, like if you have access to, let's just use I don't know, chamomile as an example. If you have access to chamomile tincture or tea, why would you choose an essential oil over those preparations? Because the medicinal properties of a plant exceed that which are in the essential oil alone. So, for me, it's like, well, are we going to use essential oils only if that's the only thing that you're going to do? Why is that? Why would you not maybe try to go for that cup of tea or go for a really good, high quality tincture instead, where you're going to get this whole array of medicinal compounds that aren't just the essential oil. The essential oil in a plant does specific things, but there's all these other hundreds of other chemical compounds in the plant that do all these other things. And so, for me, it's essential oils are very, very specifically used. And so, as an herbalist, when I rely on essential oils, the most is really looking at, things like diffusing the air and the fumigation we talked about. If I'm doing natural cleaning products, I'll maybe use some essential oils there. And then, when I'm working with my clients who are navigating difficult emotional terrain, essential oils can be really powerful because, again, there's this incredible impact of aroma on the psyche. And that's a really relevant way for me of using essential oils because it's quick, it's portable, and it's quick and it's at hand. And so it can be really, really great. When it comes to the internal use of essential oils, this is actually putting essential oils inside your body. There's a lot of people out there that, everyone seems to be an expert these days, to be honest with you, and I have a 4-year medical degree that I worked my buns off to get. And I will say that we were trained in the internal use of essential oils. And we didn't use all essential oils internally, and we actually did use them encapsulated in a carrier oil. So if you go to your local pharmacy, you can probably find encapsulated peppermint essential oil for people who have, gas and IBS. This is a very common thing that's prescribed. And that's the essential oil in a carrier oil in a capsule. Same with oregano oil, encapsulated oregano oil as well is very common on the market. And so it's not unheard of to use essential oils internally, but you need to know what you're doing. You need to understand the pharmacology of the oil you're using. You need to understand the physiology of your body and the body of the person that's going to be taking it, because these substances are strong chemical compounds. They can be very damaging, not only to your membranes, but to your organs, your kidneys, your liver. And I've heard a lot of horror stories about, and a lot of my work with, integrating essential oils into my practice has been educating my clients about, no, don't put the essential oil in your water and then drink it. Don't put that essential oil in to flavor your icing, because these oils are going to be floating around. They're going to burn you. They're going to burn your mouths. They're going to cause more damage than good. And if you really are interested in using essential oils internally, you should go to school and learn how to do it properly. Because it's just, for me, bottom line, it's kind of quasi-pharmaceutical approach to using plants, which I disagree with anyway, personally. And I think that whole plant medicine, right, or whole plants, using tinctures and teas, is going to be much more effective and much more safe than trying to use essential oils internally. And so it's not unheard of. You know, it's definitely not linear. Oh, sure, it's safe, no problem, versus, oh no, never do it. I think that there's a large dance that has to be danced in order to use essential oils as tools in that way. But if you're, you know, working from home and, you know, you're trying to help your kids, you know, I would say go with a tea. Don't go with the essential oil internally, if that makes any sense. So hopefully I articulated that well.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I mean, it's about practicality, right? I mean,
yeah, and you know, one of the things I started off with, you know, talking about, and this is something that I talk about in my book as well as my entry into my whole approach to aromatherapy in general, is that, you know, essential oils aren't magical cures any more than herbs are magical cures for anything. And to talk about them that way is, you know, it's kind of unethical, but it's also just oversimplifying, and it's not very realistic.
right.
And so I think that, you know, one of the key things about having success with essential oils and being safe with them is having realistic expectations. Understanding that, you know, these are not substances that cure anything. That's not how it works. You can use essential oils as tools to help your body do its own work, just as you can use herbs to help your body do its own work. But to say that there's an essential oil out there, believe me, I've read some crazy stuff in the last couple of months. Oh, this essential oil will cure your COVID if you stick it up your bum. I've actually read this, okay? that to think that is going to be that simple. If it were that simple, we wouldn't be in the predicament that we're in right now, right? So we have to be critical thinkers, and we need to do our work. Knowledge requires effort. So we have to become knowledgeable, we have to put the effort in, and we have to have realistic expectations. That's kind of what I would say about that.
All right, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Great.
The next one that I had, which is, it's about gender, and I'm going to rephrase or paraphrase to make it more clear, I think.
Okay.
We have someone who asked, are there essential oils that are better for men or women? And I'm really thinking, are there essential oils better for one gender or another gender? And is it based on, how would you tell? Because unless you're working with people who are very gender binary, you know, then binary, yeah, that's the right word. But if you're working with folks who are non-gender binary, I don't know that the word man or woman makes sense there. So how are you figuring?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, I'm going to interpret that. I mean, people are people, and regardless of your gender identity or expression, you're either going to like an aroma or you're not. So as far as, you know, the pleasure of experience of aroma, I do not think it sees any kind of boundaries or boxes in that way. When we're talking about biological sex, right? And, you know, there are some essential oils that are thought to be more supportive to, you know, hormone ecology associated with people who have ovaries and who have ovaries. So there are, you know, essential oils that are thought to have kind of an estrogenic effect. Although I have to be very honest with you, in reading some of the research behind that, a lot of it is very, you know, it's a lot of it's in vitro or, you know, looking at animal models, so murine models, and to me, it's not necessarily very relevant, clinically relevant, as far as having hormonal impacts. These kind of hormone balancing or, you know, essential oils, some getting into your bloodstream and causing estrogen disturbances or causing estrogen support. There is some language surrounding some oils, like Clary Sage is a good example of one where people talk about this kind of hormonal impact that it has, which I have to be honest with you, I don't necessarily buy into very much. But then, you know, when we're thinking about the psychology of aroma, you know, if we want to use this beautiful spectrum of masculinity and femininity and all the different shades of essences in between, you know, that there are going to be, you know, some aromas that some people may associate more with a masculine smell. And there may be some aromas that some people associate more with a feminine smell. I think rose is a really good example that it's, traditionally been, kind of perceived in, in cultures across the world as this kind of feminine, scent. You don't necessarily associate the scent of roses with your kind of typical dude. But so hopefully that answers the question. I think, if we're looking at it from like a biological sex perspective, there are some essential oils that are thought to impact the hormone ecology of the ovaries. I don't buy into that, to be honest with you. As an herbalist, I don't really think that they have that much of an impact. And that, the psychology of aroma is going to be just as diverse as there are expressions of gender. So, that's something that's really personal. I think enjoying aroma is a very personal journey.
Okay, I've got another one here from Fanny from the Herbal Nerd Society. She says, if I'm using aromatherapy that's just inhalation, like through a steam or a diffuser, do I need to worry about drug interactions? And if I do, where do I find that information?
Yes. So I'm going to tell you now, as an herbalist who has spent the last 15 years studying herb drug interactions specifically, I will say that when you're using essential oils in that fashion, in the air, there is very minimal risk of interactions with pharmaceuticals, simply because the amount of essential oil that actually makes it to the bloodstream to interfere with drugs at the level of the liver is so minute. There are some drugs out there. There's a list of about 12 or 13 narrow index pharmaceuticals that, if you smell the grapefruit, maybe it might throw it out of its therapeutic index. But for the most part, for most standard pharmaceuticals, okay, so we're not talking about the specialty ones that are super strong, but for most pharmaceuticals, if you're going to be diffusing essential oils in the air, I personally don't believe there to be much of a safety issue in that. Where you're really going to come into problems with essential oils and drug interactions is with topical use, and putting essential oils on the skin using a carrier oil, and then if you've got a dermal delivery system. So there's some pharmaceuticals out there that are delivered via the skin. You put the patch on, and some essential oils have been shown to increase the absorption rate of those pharmaceuticals, and that could knock off their therapeutic index. So, as long as you're not rubbing an essential oil blend, massage blend on your arm and then putting on your pharmaceutical patch, generally speaking, the topical and inhalation use of essential oils poses pretty much no risk at all for drug interactions. That's my professional opinion.
All right. It looks like we've covered just about everything here. Let me take just a second here. There's a long question.
It's okay.
Okay, so this one, I'm going to ask it. You sort of answered in a related question, but I'm going to ask the whole of this question because it does refer to how other countries use essential oils.
Okay.
So, Sicily, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. In New Zealand, she says, in New Zealand, I bought Harker Herbal's ear, nose, throat tonic, deep lung support, and chest clear, which are all made from essential oils. They're good gargles, but they taste disgusting. However, they're intended for internal use. Apparently, the French use these oils internally extensively. I have 10 and 12-year-old boys and wonder, in the event of a COVID-19 contraction, are these safe to use? There's a lot there. So
yes, well, I will say that I'm sure that there's going to be more than just the essential oil in those preparations. I would, I can't speak for those products and their safety, but I would definitely recommend getting in touch with the manufacturer and finding out what they say. It is true, and there is this whole term that's used in the United States, this, French aromatherapy, which is kind of looking at aromatic medicine or the use of essential oils internally. I was trained in herbal medicine in the United Kingdom, where again, there was a similar, it wasn't, necessarily as specific as what happens in France, but there was internal use of essential oils happening there. And it all depends on the formulation and the carrier and how it's diluted and what oils are being used. But Cicely, I would recommend very highly that you look to the manufacturer for guidance on that particular product or those particular products, because I can't really speak to their safety profile. That being said, it's the medical system in France is very different than what we have here in the United States, and even possibly very different than from what you have in New Zealand. I know that you've got medical herbalists in New Zealand as well, and it might be worth your while to look up a medical herbalist in New Zealand and start to build a relationship with them who can actually work with you and answer those questions for you, which are also going to be very culturally relevant. It really just depends on how comfortable they are using essential oils, and it may be a part of their training. But I know that there are definitely quite a number of very, very talented, very qualified herbalists in New Zealand that you could talk to about that as well.
Yeah, and actually that brings up a question that I have that, I'm going to ask, which is,
Okay.
if you're looking for an aromatherapist, let's say that, whether I'm in America or France or New Zealand or wherever, I'm looking for an aromatherapist specifically, not an herbalist, not that I'm against herbalists, but I for whatever reason, want an aromatherapist. What am I looking for in terms of training, or what words should I use?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, this is going to be the same response that we would have to how do we look for a professional herbalist? What kind of training, dictates, quality of or quality of that individual's practice. I think it's very, very difficult to say. I will say here in the United States, there is the governing organization that seems at the moment, I think there's a few, but like in the United States, but the biggest one that I know of is the National Association of Holistic Aromatherapists. That's NAHA, and they have different certification levels, for practitioners of aromatherapy, and they have attempted to create a standard of education in the United States. There's also the I always get this confused. It's the Alliance of International Aromatherapists, AIA, I think is the name of the organization, which is really looking more at kind of an international standard as well. And so, if you're in New Zealand, it's worth looking into what aromatherapy organizations are around in New Zealand and what standards of education that they have for their members, et cetera. But here in the United States, I would look at NAHA first, and I know that there are others as well, but that's the one that I know of that's kind of the most commonly referred to. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
For sharing so much information. I mean, essential oils are something that they're such a hot topic, and there's so many differing voices out there. I really appreciate you coming and talking with us, especially knowing how much training and how much time you've put into studying and making sure you really know what you're talking about before you start talking. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.